Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Carmine's Arena, a cultural gourmet of information, if you will, a feast for your mind and soul. And now, without further delay, the man, the myth, the maestro, Carmine Arena.
Greetings and welcome once again to Carmine's Arena, site of contest and conflict, venue for and of resolution. Resolution in terms of focus, remedy, and commitment, both yours and mine, to the preservation, the propagation, and indeed, hopefully, the celebration of Western civilization. Contemporary education has ceased being a noble profession and has become a carefree enterprise bereft of industry. What was once a journey of enlightenment has become a tourist trap, trading in the cheap trinkets of thought. The journey has become a sick joke. Anyone taking public schooling seriously these days risks mediocrity at best, or functional ignorance at its least worse. Teachers, once rightfully revered to the consummate benefit of their charges, are now downgraded to clinging, lingering vestiges, mere fellow travelers familiarly addressed in some quarters by their first name. This a clear example of familiarity not only breeding contempt, but also attempt, as is evidenced by news reports, as to the goings-on in said tourist havens, where clever reigns over endeavor. Discipline now becomes a dirty buzzword. Discipline, which once fostered atmospheres of classroom calm and concentration, has devolved into decline, dissolution, unto disappearance and dissipation. The resulting bad behavior of students now transformed into mates and inmates is roundly excused with psychobabble regularity. Any rare proposal of punishment, heaven forbid, is met with the threat of litigation, carrying the menace and promise of punitive damages. And so children are parent protected from consequences as they are shaped by smugness and drilled to fight against reason, against righteousness, against rigor, and against routine. Yes, public education these days has become a mad fad business and is more allied to popular entertainment as distinctly opposed to above-par edification. This union-protected business, which never bankrupts itself, given the levied annual school taxes, bankrupts the future of those promoted to an unforgiving reality, and in turn a porous posterity, possessive of and accredited by a plethora of meaningless diplomas. Teachers, yes, teachers as a professional group of civil servants are nearly impossible to fire, despite incompetence, indifference, and/or indiscretion. The long grievance process will take a teacher right up to retirement with the grant of civil service pension. The grievance be damned. The money that is squandered on education as a tourist trap. The money expended on college tuition as a tourist haven with spring break privileges. Levies upon learning the criminal burdens of profiteering as inflated as the grades given students and ratings given teachers, term after interminable term. I don't mean to be droll, or do I? It is worth noting that only exiles rarely complain as tourists, despite their being subjected to the pull of greed and the giant lull of grace. Let's face it, all too many schools hold not only the puerile, but the self-exiled in turista mode. Imagine for a spell, so to recapture, when grammar schools were once capable of grading and genuinely graduating the likes of William Shakespeare. This product of Western civilization, who it is acknowledged, is literally responsible for the very invention of the human. Why, even an apathetic reading of this bard introduces you to yourself to mold thereafter. Continue to imagine along with me that this man, this Shakespeare, who shakes us up still, never haunted the halls of higher learning and wrote his astonishing sonnets, tragedies, and deathless comedies with only a quill, only a feather, which can still caress and or tickle us, perhaps poke us in the eye. Not bad for a college no-show. Imagine further William as a child going off to school, not by bus or subway, not by horse and carriage, but on foot to a one-room schoolhouse, undoubtedly carrying his lunch along with his books, little expecting a school breakfast, but having had one at his kitchen table, the same table at which he'd take family meals, a once sacred ritual, devoid of its development unto take out and take up to one's room, well apart from family and friends. One's room where exiles can cyber contact and to oversubscribe to exile disconnects. It's downright spooky as well as kooky. I wish I had the time to discuss the education of Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Dante, Joseph Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven. You can otherwise be certain that they were in good hands and their instructors received no disrespect, let alone sass. And they had genius. Yes, I know I'm overreaching and probably exaggerating, as I might an inner voice in a Bach polyphonic composition for keyboard, let's say. One does so in order to tell, in order to clarify, in order to sustain a far bigger truth. For all truth is characteristic of an inner voice and an inner beauty. And boy, do we need beauty in an apathetic, selfish, materialistic sum we call the world. In the years I've spent in the endless glorious hours at the piano, I continue daily to learn that beauty can only be won if it is earned. Cleverness won't do, for cleverness Cleverness is ever ugliness in hiding, and even incompetence in disguise. When I returned to the States back when, from my military tour served in war-torn South Korea, I won a prestigious piano scholarship, and for a spell began to teach in the New York public school system at the same time. I discovered the experience to be a sacred pursuit and soon found myself conducting a student choral group of some 300 voices. The subject, my subject, was granted music major status and so met 5 times a week, much like math, science, etc. We performed in many venues, not the least of which was at Lincoln Center's Alice Tully Hall. My chorus was made up of students from a variety of race, creed, and ethnicity. We would travel to our performing sites, mostly by subway, and all 300 in their choral vestments would maintain absolute silence, overseen by yours truly, without any aid or assistance. When onlookers would ask me how I alone could get this group to behave obediently, my suggestion was a simple one. I'd invite them to ask any student of their choice. Each response was always pretty much the same. We're obedient because Mr. Arena expects it. That, my dear listeners, is indeed the pure definition of affirmative action. Years later, up to the present moment, the choristers, now grown into men and women, seek me out and often break bread with me as we recall the singular experience of making harmony together, making beauty together. Some have become doctors, some lawyers, teachers, plumbers, electricians, carpenters, and, of course, computer analysts and CEOs. They each admit of a core experience with its attendant vow, all made to me when as children they pledged they would never give learning a mere lick and a promise. They'd give learning a pounding. As a result, they make clear, abundantly clear, that I changed their lives for the better, and want me to know just that. Of course, the tributes touch me, and in no small measure validates my vocation as a fairly decent teacher. For whether giving a piano recital or lecturing, I admit of an irrepressible need to express and convey beauty and knowledge. Dare I say, I'm happy. This last Father's Day, as with so many others in the past, I received cards from my students, my adopted sons and daughters. One recent message was memorable. It quoted the great composer Giuseppe Verdi, who said, "Look to the past, that's where progress lies." It continued, "Regards from a dutiful son and acolyte. I say a heartfelt prayer of thanks daily for every note of music you've given me," unquote. My ambition early on was to pass on to my young students what I had been fortunate to have received from a cadre of excellent mentors in the fields of art and, yes, science. They taught me that self-limitation proves the master. That heads up gave me Johann Sebastian Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, not to mention Mozart, Chopin, and Schumann. And in math, the calculus of finite differences and of variations, and also geology, biology, adolescent psychology, etc., etc. Above all, they taught me the pride in obedience, and they taught me to have a sense of occasion. These lessons are not only venerably ancient, they are the eternal lessons which provide the key to self and its debt to society. And thus it is that children have the innate understanding that their native confusions require a masterful leader who takes them from where they are to where they want to be, even if at the time they barely know it as their ultimate destination. I am reminded of the great Irishman Oscar Wilde. He and his brother were allowed at an early age to sit at the foot of the dinner table. And so, as Oscar Wilde said, he heard as a child all the important questions of the day discussed. He and Willie, his brother, were not allowed to speak. This childhood training in holding his tongue, said Oscar, was responsible for his wagging it so successfully later on in his maturity as poet, playwright, novelist, lecturer, and raconteur. A raconteur without peer. At the foot of said dinner table, they learned pride in obedience and developed a sense of occasion. Get it? Many children lucky enough to be taught to hold their tongues in check often set their unspoken thoughts in poetry. For art offers a well-earned freedom, always. Here is another example of Oscar Wilde as a boy who just lost his younger sister, Isola, to brain fever. The melancholy which he always afterwards insisted underlay his jaunty behavior may have been first awakened by his sister's early death. The poem is entitled Requiescat. Here it is now. Hear how he consoled himself, and I quote, "Tread lightly, she is near under the snow. Speak gently, she can hear the lilies grow. All her bright golden hair tarnished with rust, she that was young and fair, fallen to dust. Lily-like, white as snow, she hardly knew she was a woman, so sweetly she grew. Coffin board, heavy stone lie on her breast. I vex my heart alone, she is at rest. Peace, peace, she cannot hear the lyre or sonnet. All my life is buried within here. Heap earth upon it." Wow, and from a boy. Meanwhile, we must plow ahead to the theme and thrust of this episode, number 94. And I entitle this episode, The Tourist Trap. For such is the zone of our public schools wherein students are treated to the sad trinkets of thought, logic be damned. And what of so-called teachers as educators? Why, butchers are closer to surgeons than many of these phonies. I know that seems harsh, but listen to where I'm coming from. A cheating ring in Memphis gets its leader a 7-year prison sentence. Mr. Clarence Munford Sr., a former teacher and assistant principal, was convicted of orchestrating a scheme to help teachers cheat on certification exams. Along with his 7-year sentence, he was fined $167,000. Prosecutors said that for 15 years, Mr. Mumford, a black educator, had doctored driver's license and enlisted teachers to impersonate others in Arkansas, Mississippi, and Tennessee. Impersonate them at exams that many states require for teaching licenses. The scheme involved 36 people, and get this, including Mr. Mumford's son, Clarence Jr., who had a stand-in take a test for him, as well as Cedric Wilson, a former wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers, who worked as a substitute teacher in Memphis. Others as well went to jail and paid fines. Yes, such is the brazen conduct which speaks volumes about the sacrilege that constitutes public education in too darn many locales throughout our country. Imagine thousands of dollars for someone else to take your test, leading to unearned tenure, an unearned pension. All these people involved, and many of their ilk, represent the current reprehensible breed of secular progressive left-wing apologists who give us endlessly accurate description of what never occurs. All smoke and mirrors. At the college level, think of the syndicate that academia has become. Columbia and other universities employing felons to teach, why not? That progressive political thought that even deceives the criminal who imagine that he or she has paid their debt to the murderers and to the murdered and their victims' orphans. And don't you tell them otherwise, or you will be besmirched by the term extremist. Meanwhile, at Columbia, where parents cough up $43,000 and counting a semester, their children are on campus mingling with murderers, rapists, and the like. The very same people protected by the courts, the same courts which will not allow felons to even serve jury duty. Ergo, among and between the courts, legal system, public schools, and academia, our children are granted the lip service to and of learning while remaining untutored and rude, crude, blemished by the lack of mental hygiene all about them. Imagine, will you, at Columbia, where felons profess. Peerage indeed has gone steerage at first-class rates and first-class prices. At another time, I'll cite a personal experience with education's incurable malady, the malady of innovation. Whenever I hear that word associated with education, I know it to be a cover-up for soft bigotry practiced on minorities, indoctrinated unto victimhood. Let me go into details at another time when I'll have more time. For now, allow me to quote the words of one of this nation's secretaries of state, the highest cabinet post one can be assigned. Prejudice and bigotry are brought down by the sheer force of determination of individuals to succeed, and the refusal of a human being to let prejudice define the parameters of the possible. Unquote. Those words spoken by Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. Rice, who is also a kindred spirit, since she is a classically trained pianist, who I might add continues to practice daily. Playing the piano at a transcendent level offers the best method of keeping score, forgive the pun, keeping score and facing the music. These, my practice sessions, I might add, parenthetically, were only interrupted by the call to the dinner table for the hunger-satisfied joys of the family meal. Those meals, I repeat, taken together, and which accords us the pleasures of cozy repetition. Excuse me. Cozy repetition, that musical hum that keeps us in tune with civilization and its civilizing traditions. Rituals which offer the magic, mystery, and miracle of our better angels. I now close this 94th episode of Carmine's Arena by once again reacting and reaching out to the sense and sensibilities of Oscar Fingal O'Flaherty Wills Wilde. Listen closely as I quote Wilde. "The soul is born old but grows young. That is the comedy of life. The body is born young and grows old. That is life's tragedy. This tragi-comedy, my dear listeners, can only be ameliorated by knowledge and ultimately to be superseded by wisdom, which places a halo, as it were, about experience and understanding." Ask yourselves, are our public school as tourist traps in possession of the tools to shape an outcome which realizes wisdom? Wisdom which keeps us from becoming a depraved electorate. A man of wisdom, John Ruskin, in fact, Ruskin was a beloved teacher of Wilde while he was at Oxford. Ruskin said, "Let us reform our schools and we shall find little reform needed in our prisons." If you followed every thread of my argument, Wilde and Ruskin sum up my account with an exclamation mark and a personal prayer of thanks. Yes, look into your schools and deny them the right to become tourist traps. Like another wit informed us, Mark Twain, don't let your schooling get in the way of education, your education. And until next time, my dear listeners, I invite you all to keep the faith.
If you have any comments or other remarks, and that I perhaps could even read on some of these broadcasts, please do not hesitate to write to me, Carmine Arena, P.O. Box 1029, Larchmont, New York 10538.